Good afternoon, my name is Neville Elstone, I'm the Director of Cumbria Woodlands. What we're trying to do, I'll let Carrie to introduce herself in a second, is we're trying to have a cross between Gardener's Question Time and The Rest is Politics podcast. So it's like The Rest is Forestry. So I'll hand over to Carrie, who is the co-presenter here.
Hi, I'm Carrie from Cumbria Woodlands. I'm the Training Development Lead and I also do a lot of work in research at Cumbria Woodlands. There we go.
Woo. Excellent, thanks Carrie. So we're going to start off with a couple of planted questions. Chris, can you give me a number between 1 and 7?
Oh, 5.
5, good one. So, question number 5. Farming and forestry, always the divide between the two, so well picked. I'll have a first bash and then you can follow up.
Yeah.
So traditionally in land use in the UK, farming and forestry have always been apart, and British foresters always looked to Scandinavia to go, how could we do it different? How do they combine the two? Hello, Simon. I'm here for half an hour, but then we can catch up after that if that's... So how can we play that different model? And we can really see the first seeds of people starting to farm and trees and woodlands, and some of the current incentives, the one that I keep forgetting the name of at the moment, the wood pasture one, is absolutely driving that bridging the gap, as is some of the wood heat stuff. I'll hand the mic over to Carrie, see whether you want to add to that.
Well, I like farming and I like forestry. I'm a wool spinner. I'm going to start with that, and I'm a forestry consultant. Okay, trees and the land, sheep, the food, everything. It's fantastic. But what we do need to do is really work together on this, because the trees will help soils, they will help your yields, they will help to provide good pasture for animals, for livestock on farms, and shelter and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of money out there right now that you could use to put these trees in. So I see what used to be a very big divide, thinking 80s, very, very big divides, forestry, farming, completely separate, coming together. And it's been coming together really nicely over the last, I would say, decade, slowly building up steam. And these conversations need to keep happening, I think. We just need to keep talking about it.
Yeah, completely agree about the conversation thing. And, you know, the message for our Woodland Advisory Service, our free Woodland Advisory Service that we've been operating, is one of how can we help your business? How can we look at the entirety of your business across farming, across land use? What could trees, woodlands, hedges do to complement what you do economically and environmentally? Cool. Simon, job for you. Pick a number between 1 and 7, but not 5. 3, good question. Is plantations on ancient semi-natural woodland sites and ancient woodland sites the rack of the forestry world? When I say rack, I mean the rack concrete thing. Is it the forbidden kind of hidden subject that we've all forgotten about? So, ancient semi-natural woodlands, have we forgotten about that in the dash for creation? Carrie, shall I give you a first bash at that?
Well, we are really beginning to recognise the value of our ancient woodlands and our ancient and veteran trees in our landscapes. Maybe a little bit too late, but we are recognising that value for ecology, for resilience, for everything that we need. And it's still sitting at that tipping point. There's only 1%, less than 1% ancient woodlands in the country, across the whole of the country. It is incredible how small amount that we have left, yet you have huge road schemes, I won't mention any by name, but huge road schemes that are just ploughing through them and then replanting their ancient woodlands. I don't think that is something you can actually physically do, because you need 600 years worth of ancient woodland in there to make that a thing, or at least, around 400 years. Give it 400. It's just something that is incredibly fragile, I think, and yes, we still need to plough a lot more into this and a lot more thinking into this, and help people recognise what they have and the value in it. Back to you.
So if we look at the incentives first, the incentives are massively skewed towards creation rather than management. So we're building new and not looking after what we already have. The stuff we have, you can't rebuild, super precious, as Carrie said. Super precious, not just nationally, but internationally. You know, if we look at the western seaboard of Europe, you know, there's not much stuff down that western seaboard that we have in Cumbria. So it's just super precious. And then, you know, if you just look at the whole movement towards creation and offsetting and stuff, that absolutely isn't replicated in the world of woodland management. Oh.
Could I just say that actually leading the way in Ancient Woodlands is the Woodland Trust, and I think they've done a very, very good job of keeping that. I'm wondering what you're thinking about that, Neville, but actually keeping that voice going for Ancient Woodlands across the country. They're out there giving advice on Ancient Woodlands, and we have someone in Cumbria Woodlands who also works in partnership with the Woodland Trust giving advice, and we're able to offer that to the public to help you with your woodland sites. And I think that is incredibly valuable. Though we still have someone who's driving that force forward, but it isn't enough. It really isn't enough. There should be some really targeted funding in this.
How on message was Carrie there, selling our products part of the way through? Go for it, Chris.
I'm curious about your views on Emmerdale and Martnott forests, which were in part ancient woodlands, then became forest plantations with mixed bits still left alone, now being restored back towards more native woodlands or semi-natural woodlands. Is that like giving you a big edge over planting a wood completely afresh? Is that a good way to go? You're already a 100 years into the process.
Can you summarise that question?
Yeah, so the question was about wild Ennerdale and hard knot forest and converting them into wildwood effectively. If I can broaden that out a little bit, which is, it's about the whole rewilding agenda. And I think the rewilding agenda is brilliant and worrying. So I really, really worry that we have binary land use. So we have stuff that's going to be absolutely hard farmed over there, out with incentives, arguably out with regulation as well, because we can't really regulate rural land use well. What I mean by that is, things like diffuse pollution, etc. We just can't do that. And then over on the other side, we have rewilded land, and I really worry about that we're not in that position where we can just switch off the production of food and fibre entirely from that, and that's what we're seeing. So I think that space in between the two is an incredibly important place to play in. And many of the rewilded sites could still produce fibre as well as achieving many of their other objectives. I'm just not sure it's a luxury that we can afford. I think in terms of many of the kind of non-market social goods, if you think about water quality, if you think about carbon, if you think about biodiversity and landscape, you could still do that at the same time as producing some fibre. I'm not saying in the traditional model of hardcore Sitka spruce, but I think we could do more with the silvicultural knowledge we have. So how could we better play with the palette of species that we have, broaden that palette of species away from native, because I really worry if we live purely in that native land, that's kind of a scary place with climate change coming along and the number of challenges that we have in terms of plant health stuff as well. So yeah, the productivity thing and the carbon thing as well. Our carbon markets are really quite naive at the moment. We have a brilliant standard, but that's not looking at the whole life cycle of carbon. And I think that's the place that we need to play more ultimately, so that if we are harvesting and locking up that timber, then you need to be rewarded for that, rather than just growing, sequestering, and then holding on the land. Because then it's a one-time carbon hit rather than a multiple-time carbon hit. I'll hand over to Carrie.
Well, I think There's another divide that we really haven't mentioned. There's a divide that we've spoken about, farming and forestry. Nice big polarisation there. Shouldn't be polarised, and that's an issue in itself. But it's productive forestry and forestry for native woodlands or for biodiversity outcomes, they're also divided. How do we meet in the middle with that? And that's really key to, well, we call it rewilding or now wilding, because we've realised you don't want to go back to what we had, you kind of want to move forward. And we want to have resilient landscapes. We were always part of that landscape ourselves as well. So there's a certain amount of management that goes on in there for us too. So we need to, that is our resource for living. So that's what we need. So I think there is, in answer to your question, Chris, I think moving the landscape changing at Hardknot and at Ennerdale, people realise they've made mistakes and they're looking again at the landscape and going, this isn't resilient. What we're doing isn't as resilient. It's not meeting our needs or the needs of the wider communities that exist there or the wider biodiversity that exists there. So, and that's really important that we recognise that.
I'll come to Elaine for a number in a second, but before I do that, I'll just come back directly to Ennerdale, right? So I used to work in Ennerdale for the Forestry Commission as the foreman there, and I always used to sit in my van and have my bait in the morning and look at the area around Black Sail and go, do you know what? What I want to the upper edges of this forest is what you see in Canada, is that kind of fluffy, kind of graded into the scrub, and we really didn't have that there, and we're absolutely striving for that now, and that has to be a good thing. But how do we keep some productivity within that system as well? It's a balance, I think. So I'll go to Elaine for a number between 1 and 7, and then happy to take questions from the floor as well. Number 1, ash dieback, reasons to be cheerful. I'm trying to get a positive out of ash dieback.
You can start on that one. You can start.
So I think there's real negatives. I really worry about trees in the landscape with ash dieback. I think in terms of positives for me, there are 3. I forgot the first one already. The second one is about deadwood. Deadwood absolutely drives biodiversity. Anything where you're getting more invertebrates has to be great, and deadwood's really good for that. The other thing is, in woodland systems, in many of our woodland systems, we haven't got much diversity of age, species, etc. So anything that's creating a space can be a good thing. And so ash dieback, to a degree, is creating a space, as long as the grazing's appropriately managed, where other stuff can thrive. And the final reason to be cheerful for me is that actually a lot of stuff isn't dying. It has hard years, and then it comes back. Maybe it has a hard year or 2, and then comes back to a degree. So the loss of stuff is slower than we expected, maybe not as final as we expected, and also think of it as a great big experiment. As long as we don't chop them all down, we're seeking out those that will respond, be able to cope with ash dieback in the longer term. And because we're doing this at scale across the entirety of the landscape, we will find trees that are able to thrive and survive.
We've been through this before, haven't we? We've lost trees to elm disease, but then look at oak dieback, Phytophthora rumorum. That didn't get rid of all the oaks, and the oaks are still there, struggling along with it. You get one infection, it opens you up to other infections, and at that point, that's where the tree is really struggling. Not every tree is going to die, and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing things re-flourishing. We're also seeing a lot of research over on the continent where they're pollarding their ash trees, pollarding the ash trees, because it's coming in through the stems, it's coming in through the leaves. So that's where it's coming in. So by pollarding the ash tree, not only are you prolonging the life of the tree anyway, because that's what we used to do with our ashes, that's why we have so many ancient ashes in the landscape across Cumbria, but you're also then helping it get through this period of heavy disease. So there are things that we can do to help, and there's also, as Neville said, what's left behind is these great hulking wonderful biodiverse stumps that are going to be knocking about as well, where the ash maybe have died back, but it's left pieces, and eventually it'll start resprouting again. And we are seeing that with, we've seen that with elms, we've seen that, and you know, we'll see how this goes. We'll see how this goes. But if you get rid of all your ashes, how are we going to know? I think that's quite a key point. It's everywhere already. So unless you're told you have to fell because you are somewhere near a sensitive site, think about it. I mean, there's a lot we can learn from it.
I'm only going to take 2 more questions and then we'll stop. Happy to take a question from the floor if there are any, or equally I'll go for a number.
I've got a question about the supply chain for timber production and how it is responding to a change in the way that we're growing trees or producing trees for timber. Let's say in a woodland pasture system or hedgerow system or multi-species woodland system. Is the supply chain adapting?
So I'm really so the question was about, is the supply chain adapting? So you mean all the sawmillers, etc.
Yeah.
So I'm really nervous about replying to that because there's somebody in the room that knows far more about timber supply chains than I ever want to, Simon. So I would say no, the supply chain isn't responding to that because the supply chain by and large has to do stuff at extreme bulk for it to be competitive. Now there are a number of smaller scale millers now, but in terms of volumes that's tiny. The wood fuel market is massive compared to what it would be, both at kind of big industrial scale but also at kind of log burner scale, and I guess that helps drive stuff, and the prices for that are really good. But you know, the main thing is we want spruce at this diameter and this straightness and this knot freeness, and we want it here and we want it now, and it has to be competitive with the price at the dockside because we're a price taker. We import 80% of our timber.
Give a quick go on.
We're going to be marked on this.
We're going to be marked on this. So when we were looking maybe 10 years ago, you're looking at continuous cover forestry and the large diameter trees that were coming out there that had to be shipped onto the continent, maybe to be cut up sometimes. We didn't have the infrastructure for it. We still don't. So this market isn't very reactive. With the nursery supplies right now, we need to get trees in the ground, yet there's not quite enough coming through. And that can be for a variety of reasons. COVID, for one, did have an issue, did have a knock-on effect on the nursery supply chain itself, the work. And number 2, the nurseries themselves have issues of disease and things that are going through there as well. We've got climate change coming in. So it's very difficult when you have to think several years in advance of something, and particularly with the nurseries, I feel for them because they do have to think very far in advance as to what the market might be. I think they've been meeting a lot of the people that have come to us for advice. I think they've been able to get hold of the trees they wanted. They may have had to make compromises on what type of tree that is, because it's not just Sitka. There's a lot of different types of trees, and you're trying to get the right tree in the right place, but all you're offered is hazel and oak every time you go into a nursery. You're not going to be able to do that. You're not going to be able to diversify in the way we need to. So, there you go.
Yeah, and even getting the right Sitka can be an issue as well. Cool. Any more questions from the floor before I bring it to a close? Cool. I'm not going to drag this out. Thanks ever so much for your attention. Carrie, incredibly short notice. Thank you. Really insightful. Hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Goodbye.